Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lessons Learned, the dumbest thing I've ever done with money. My name is Suzanne, and I am the head coach at G.R.A.C.E Financial Coaching, and I am very excited to welcome my friend, Chris Harcksen-Lucero today. Chris was a flight paramedic, and she has spent her entire career helping other people on their worst day. Having personally worked in a high-stress environment for many years, Chris knows firsthand how poor spending habits and failure to plan can result in taking overtime, not spending time with family just to make ends meet. Chris is a wife and a mom of 2 boys and a stepmom of 2 daughters. And Chris helps her clients navigate and manage one of life's biggest stressors, personal finance. Amen, Chris. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm really good.
Yes. That was great. Tell us about your past career as a flight paramedic. That is not something.
Well, I'm still current. I'm still working. Great. I'm still full time. I'm still flying full time, and that's part of the things that keep me going. So I still currently work full time flying. I started doing peer support over 10 years ago at one of my previous company. Started doing peer support. And I just really loved that interaction with coworkers and helping them manage the stress of the career and the job. And then we started learning more about resiliency training, which is, making sure you're eating right, sleeping right, and just really taking care of your overall self and practicing good self-care. One element of resiliency is finance, being financially resilient. And I am a Dave Ramsey trained coach also. And so I have always loved numbers and budgets, in the last 8 years. And so I was like, wait a minute, there's a coaching thing? So I can teach people how to have better financial resiliency other than just doing what I've been doing. And so about 2.5 years ago, I made the transition and I was like, I think I'm going to try this coaching thing. And as I got more involved, it's become a bigger priority for me. I would love to see me become more full-time coaching and part-time flying. It's hard to say goodbye to a career that you've had for a long time. That's one of the other stressors of the job.
Yeah, and it's such a specific career. It's such a specific adrenaline rush. It's such a specific area of expertise that I'm sure you see people coming up through the ranks and you're like, oh, I should probably stick around here a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's definitely a big learning curve. A big learning curve.
Yeah. Good morning. Our friend Abby is watching. Hi, Abby. How are you? So let's go back to the peer support that you were doing at the time, because as you described it, that's coaching. What other areas of peer support besides sleeping right, eating right, having good self-care did you cover in those areas?
So a lot of times you're teaching people the responses to stress, acute stress. What does that look like? What does delayed stress look like? Cumulative, which is your burnout, which in this profession, there's a cycle that you can go through with burnout, with having that work-life balance getting mixed up. And then the furthest is the PTSD at the furthest end of the stress spectrum. And so you're educating people on you're normalizing, because part of the problem is not realizing that what your body goes through in these situations is normal. And then if we're not balancing that with the taking care of ourselves, the cumulative stress can start to take effect. And, this profession has some of the highest, all first responders have some of the highest divorce rates, suicide rates, and organ failure, organ cancers, and things like that. And that is just all of the things that are meant to protect you in the fight or flight. Those things that are meant to, the cortisols, the glucose, the adrenaline, the things that keep us going and safe and able to handle stressful situations. But if we don't learn to manage how to offload that stuff and carry it around, it can be destructive.
Wow. Yeah, I work with, I tend to have a lot of police officers, firefighters, teachers, starting to see some PTSD in
Yes.
teachers.
Yes.
Um, and it's that is everything you've just described, really, the acute stress, the chronic stress leading to burnout, and the PTSD is across all of those careers. And it's to have to do that for 30 years, or to want to do that for 30 or 35 years, it can definitely take its toll. But I also see, and I'm not making light of it. My husband's in the military, but I see PTSD in finances. And I see it way more often than I really want to talk about. Just a day or two ago, I was speaking to another coach, and they were telling me about an issue they were having with a client. And I said, whoa, time out. There is some sort of old financial PTSD or something that happened when they were a kid, because their behavior now wouldn't be like that if something hadn't happened in the past. Did their parents file bankruptcy? Did they lose their home? Did they watch a car get taken away when they were 7? What happened? And how do you see PTSD in people's finances with the ones you coach? Do you see anything like that?
You bring up a great point, because a couple of things that I end up seeing was, so we have this number side, right? And a lot of the clients that I've been working with are coming to me, and they're like in a stress, because so when your body's in a stressful situation, you're very automatic, you're reactive. It's based a lot of things on your training, right? You fall back and you're doing the things you're supposed to do. That's why first responders train so hard, and military, because when you're in a stressful situation, you want to respond appropriately, correctly, and then your brain kicks in, right? Same thing on the other side, except in our personal life, in our financial side, we don't realize that we're having a stress response. We just think this is the way it's supposed to be, or this is what we're going through, this is normal. And so trying to get people back to that, and then reaching out for help becomes very difficult, because there's like, it's hard to ask for help, especially when you don't realize that what's happening to you is something normal, and that you need someone maybe to take you to the next level, right? And so I end up seeing the overspending or the underspending, those fears that we have that come back. And a lot of those things we were taught young, or learned young, or saw something. And it's like, we don't make good decisions either when we're in a stressful situation. So a lot of clients that have been drawn to me are people who, like, I'm pretty bold. I'm used to, digging deep, asking questions, getting personal, and everything, because I've had to do that on the medical side. So asking hard questions comes normal. And because I know that I can't help somebody on the medical side, on the trauma side, if I don't know details and know information. So I take that and do that on the financial side. And so I make people feel, I guess, relaxed enough, trustworthy enough to tell me the things, so that we can make a plan together to kind of like, okay, let's normalize, let's stabilize, so then we can get to what the deeper issues are.
Oh, I did not realize we were going to have so many parallels in this conversation. Good morning, Shannon. Oh, Shannon, thank you. Shannon, I worked with a few years ago. She made such great progress on her debt. She says, working with Coach Suzanne really helped me overcome financial PTSD. Oh, yes, it is. It's true. It's out there. You mentioned the overspending and the underspending. I had a client a couple years ago who came to me, full disclosure. She knew what she was doing wrong already. She said, when I get stressed out, I go shopping, but I don't go to the mall. I go to the thrift store. So I come home and I have justified spending $100 at the thrift store because it was a thrift store. And she actually recognized that she was going through this justification. Here's the denial, here's the justification. And then she comes home and she has $100 worth of stuff from the thrift store, which, by the way, I don't know where she was keeping all of it. She was not a hoarder. But talk a little bit about the underspending. When have you seen that?
The fear side, the underside, the fear side, going, that whole, I can't have enough, I'm not going to make enough, just being afraid that things are going to go poorly, and that you just end up going, okay, I am going to hang on to everything, and having that fear again, and bringing fear into it. And again, now you're not making rational decisions possibly. And then again, the whole thing is trying to live your best life. All the things that we do, from finance, just to, taking care of our health and diet, exercise, all those things are about trying to live your best life. And money can be one of those huge things.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got two relatively finite things, time and money. You can always make more money, but that means you've probably given up more time. So
yeah.
Which one is it? Which one is it? Well, Chris, I know that you have made some financial mistakes in the past, as have I. And the reason I have this show is to help people realize everyone's done it. So what would you say is the dumbest thing you've ever done with money?
Okay, so like many guests on your show that I've listened to before, they say things like, oh, which one do I pick? So I have the same thing. I've made plenty of mistakes, but I was trying to go back to some of my earliest mistakes. And it was after my first divorce. I'm definitely an EMS first responder I'm on my third marriage, but after my first divorce, I went out and bought, and so in the marriage, I was always, even though I was 23 getting divorced, I was always more financially responsible. I always ran the finances and, kept limits on things, and like, oh, we can't overspend here or there. I went out and bought a motorcycle, and I financed it, and I could make the payments. We always say that I could make the payments. The payment wasn't the problem, but I did go out and I got a motorcycle. Like, I really needed that. But back then there were not a lot of women in my profession. So a lot of the guys had motorcycles, and I would hang out and we'd go do our Sunday motorcycle runs and everything. And I wanted to join in, and I had a good time and everything, but I look back and I just was like, yeah. So my motorcycle was kind of like my rebellion, like, okay, I need to make myself feel better, and I'm just going to go buy something extravagant, basically. At the time, that was pretty extravagant because I didn't make a lot back then. And I had a house, and I had the house, and I had to make the house payment until things were all figured out. So
yeah, motorcycles today are still very expensive. And so, relatively speaking, you're 23 and at the beginning of your career, and here you are, basically, back then it was probably the equivalent to a car payment, really. They're not cheap.
No. And it was, still remember that bike.
That's hysterical. So we financed it.
I financed it because I was living paycheck to paycheck. I was like a lot of people. I was not in, this is what you always say, I'm not in debt because I can make the payment. Right. So I was not in debt. I know I had a credit card that I would use, and I don't remember carrying big balances, but I was really living paycheck to paycheck. I wasn't putting money away. I would get my paycheck, pay the mortgage, pay the bills. I drove a used car at the time. And well, I've always driven a used car, but I had a used car that I had from high school, basically, from my parents, my Volkswagen, and a Bug. And this was the first thing that I bought for myself by myself.
What was that like? Was at the time, like, were you scared when you were buying the bike? Was it empowering? What was that feeling when you were physically there?
It was a little bit of both. So it was empowering because I was like, okay, I'm doing this. Am I doing this? Yes, I'm doing this. So yeah, I felt like, okay, I'm making this big decision and I can handle this. And this is going to be so much fun. It's going to change my life. I'm going to have all this good times. And at the same time, it was scary because I didn't have my motorcycle license. So I actually had to have someone drive me home. And and then I'm like, I'd ridden a dirt bike before, right? But never, the closest I was to motorcycles was being on the back of motorcycles, right? Or showing up on a motorcycle accident. But yeah, I drove my motorcycle, and I had to learn how to ride it after that.
That's hilarious. So as a fellow motorcyclist, my husband and I met at a Harley Davidson dealership. We both still have our own bikes. I do not ride on the back unless we're dropping a bike off for service or something. So how long I just have to ask, what was the period between you purchasing the bike and you getting the motorcycle license?
Like right away. I did that first part.
Okay.
You do the written, because you can do that little written part, right? You only do the first part, and then you just can't have anybody on the back of your bike, can't drive at night, did that whole thing, right? And but then I just went right, they went home, I'm like, okay, down and then up, and I was off and going. So and I was always, it was very mechanical. Okay, how do I, what's the mechanics on this? I was always the last one in the group, slow and steady, but I never laid the bike down. Let's just put it that way. Nice. I mean, it was a small bike. I mean, it was small. It looked big,
but at the same time, you had that background of, for anybody who doesn't know, you had that background of riding dirt bikes, and I didn't have that. So when I learned how to ride a motorcycle as an adult, it was extremely intimidating. Doesn't matter how big or small the bike was. It was very intimidating, but you had that background. So, well, good. It didn't sit around in the garage for a period of time. You got right on it.
No.
So if we could go back.
The caveat was, I was a grown woman and I did not tell my parents about this. I think they saw it in the garage and I said it was a friend's.
No, you lied to them after they saw it?
Yes, because I was like, I thought it was I realized it was irresponsible to a certain extent, and I know it was kind of scary to them or something. So and now I'm in helicopters, so go figure.
Right, the motorcycle looks very pale compared to what you do. So what would we do if we could go back? If you could get back to that time, we're 23 years old, we're getting divorced. No, I mean, let's really get into this, because knowing what you know now, you're basically a life coach with the peer support that you did, all of that, managing stress. I mean, we're selling you short by calling you just a financial coach. You've seen it all and supported people through it all. So we're 23, we're getting divorced, we have to make a mortgage payment, right? We're early on in our career, and we've just bought a motorcycle. Knowing everything you know now, and you saw this girl about to walk out with a motorcycle, what would you say to her?
The same thing I started to say afterward to everybody when I would sit across from them in the ambulance and be like, okay, you got a nice paycheck. Don't go out and get a big fancy car or truck right now, right? Or boat. I was like, okay, this is dumb. I need to make sure, going back, if I was me now and you stuck me back there, I'd go, okay, I can get that bike, but I need to put a few other things in play. I need to make sure that I am saving for my living now. And that's what I try to teach people now. I want to live now, but I need to think about my future too. And that work-life balance and that living now, spending now, and saving for the future. I didn't think that I could even put $25 aside. I don't have money to save. I'll save when I make more, I'll save more when I make more. I'll think about my retirement later on. I'll think about putting money away later on. I never I just said I didn't have time for it. I looked at the money and I said, it doesn't go that way. And that whole pay yourself first, I'm like, that doesn't work. I'll never be able to buy anything fun. Right.
Yeah.
And really now, hindsight, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could have been, I'm in a good place now, but I could have been even better.
Yeah.
And I could have still had those things, but at the same time, taking care of myself now, but realizing retirement and saving for things and having things organized is actually saving myself in the future. And it was really giving me that peace of mind fund, my comfort fund, and those things really matter, because as you get further in this career, and some people start out and have the first bad call and it's the worst thing they've ever seen, and that is forever. You never know in your career when the bad call, the bad situation is ever going to hit you. And I've heard it from people say, I can't take time off for myself. I can't have that break. And that breaks my heart. I don't want somebody to be like, I have to work overtime, but the overtime's killing me. It's giving me that cumulative thing. So my advice to myself would have been, hey, you never know what's going to happen. You never know when you're going to need it, but let's make sure we have a plan in place so you can have some fun now. But in case something happens in the future and you do get older, because being in this profession, you see a lot of death and dying.
Yeah.
And you have no problem talking about death and dying, but you also have your own mortality kind of sits there. And you have there's this thing where you're like, okay, what if I never make it down what if I don't get old? And I'm like, okay, then let's have fun now, right? Well, what if we get old? I don't want to eat cat food. So it's like trying to have that balance. And realizing that when you're young, I was just like, oh my gosh. So after that, a couple years later, I was a medic by 21. I started working in the profession at 19, right out of high school when I was an EMT. And so then I would work with younger people as I got a little bit further along, and I'd look at them and I'd go, I know you got your first paycheck. Don't go out and finance a car. I go, buy a car, but don't finance a car. What do you see if you pull up to every fire station, police station, ambulance company in the parking lot?
Yep.
Big trucks, big cars. And I'm not saying nobody can have that, because I like to have all those things, fun things too. I have a little trailer. I love to go camping, but it's a matter of protecting yourself now and in the future. Having that both.
And it's the same thing on military bases as well too. And then they have these lots on military bases where people know to go, because that's where the cars that can no longer be afforded are up for sale.
Yeah.
And so it's a very secure profession. It's not going anywhere, all of these professions. Yep. And I think to your point, you kind of do have a secure paycheck. We're always going to need ambulance drivers. We're always going to need cops. We're always going to need firefighters. We're always going to need medical professionals, and we're always going to need the military.
Right.
So that safety kind of subconsciously, we just think that paycheck is showing up every single 2 weeks, every single 1st and 15th. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. You mentioned earlier about living now. And I think we really need to address this, because I actually met with my own financial advisor earlier this week. And I said, what are you seeing? What should we be preparing for? Blah, 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 blah. And he made a comment that I don't think I ever, and he's young. He's not some 80-year-old financial advisor. He's probably a couple years younger than me. And he said, I'm helping people focus more on living now. And in a post-pandemic world, prior to COVID, we had YOLO and FOMO and all those ridiculous, I'm embarrassed to be classified as a millennial. It's ridiculous. But he was serious, and people saw a lot of death and dying. Those of us who are not in that profession saw a lot of it over the last 2 to 3 years. And he's helping people, instead of saying, hey, you've got to fully fund this Roth. You've got to put that full, you've got to meet that match at your 401k. You've got to do the match and a half, whatever the conversation is that he's been having with his clients. It's shifted. His priority as a financial advisor has shifted over the last 2 to 3 years. And to your point, there is a way to do that. There is a way to have fun now and prepare for the future. Because guess what? My financial advisor wouldn't have a job if he wasn't helping people prepare for the future. Right. But
exactly.
I think our mentality has really shifted since COVID, and people are starting to recognize we don't want to wait to take the grandkids to Disney World. What if someone's not here in a year? What if someone's not here in 2 years? Let's figure out how we can make that trip happen now and make those memories and have those pictures. And then we sit down and we save for the next trip in 2 years. It doesn't have to all go on a credit card, though.
No. I love that whole, when I, ask people, okay, if we say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Yeah. And having that And then if I say no to this, what doors do open for me? So it's a matter of, if you're working with somebody who's all about, I've got to get out of debt, and they want to do the whole beans and rice, and they're like driven, and no one else is affected, and they're like driven. And then I'm like, okay. And then there's other people who are like, I have to use a credit card. And I'm like, but I want to get out of debt. And you're like, okay, how can we do both? How can we kind of like still live, but transition away from having that stress that you said is coming? What are we putting on there? What makes us really live? I always compare it to like calories. I'm no diet. Anybody can do a diet for a short period of time. And then you're like, you want cake, and then you want all the cake. And I'm like, how do we eat a piece of cake and still be on our healthy diet plan? And it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. And so that's why I like to call my budget. I say, everybody says budget is such a bad word, but spending plan. It's a spending plan. How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to spend your money? That kind of a thing, so that you can have that now.
Yeah. And a very small example of this would be, I just met with new clients this week, and one of the first things they told me was, we fired the cleaning lady and the landscaper. And in my head, a little bell went off, because instead of sitting there and saying, awesome, I'm so glad you fired them, you're saving that money. This is a working couple. They both have very demanding jobs. And in the back of my head, I'm like, that might not have been the right move. That might not have been the right move, because isn't their time more valuable spent A, working, and then B, with their family, with their kids? Is the offset of $130 a month for the cleaning lady, was that worth it? Was that worth it? Now we have debt we need to pay off, but was that worth the $130? And so that's something I need to explore with them, but that's just a very small example of what you're talking about. How do we finance the trip to Disney World with the 8 grandkids? Well, it's going to be a lot more than $130 a month. I'll tell you that right now.
Right.
So what's that trade-off? What is that trade-off? That we never get to go, that we never get to take them on that trip? Oh, it's an opportunity cost, like you said.
Yeah. And then it just realizing that everything is that whole balance. And most of us are trying to have balance in our life, globally with everything. But a lot of it, finance attacks so much of it, because anybody in my profession has heard, I just need to work 1 overtime shift to pay for that car. But that means you're working your regular job and 1 extra shift just to have your daily life. That's, and then when you want to take time off, or what if you need to take time off, or what if you're forced to take time off? Now you don't just have to yourself to focus on, you've got to focus on, how am I going to pay for all this stuff? Because I have to have this overtime. I have to do these things. I don't want anybody to be like that.
Right.
I don't want all the other things that come along in the profession, the divorces, the heart attacks, the strokes, all the other cancers and medical illnesses that come along in this profession on top of that to affect people.
Yeah. It is. It's such a balance, and it can be achieved, by the way.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your honesty and your vulnerability and sharing your financial blunders with everyone. All of Chris's contact information is in the show notes, and I hope you guys will join me. If you jumped in late, the replay will be on YouTube in a few hours, and I hope you guys will join me next week for another episode of Lessons Learned: The Dumbest Thing I've Ever Done with Money. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you for having